it's clear that something is very wrong with the United States' approach to work culture. Sure, we are known as innovators, hardworking, and actually pretty friendly in the workplace, but we're also very out of balance. And judging from the comments that you all leave, it sounds like we've got a lot of work to do to catch up to the rest of the world. Hey everybody, it's Brian from A Life After Layoff, and today I want to do a deep dive into the United States' approach to work culture and figure out why we're so off kilter with our approach to careers. Now, if you don't know who I am, I'm a corporate recruiter and an HR professional with over 20 years of experience interviewing and hiring thousands of people into some of the world's most well-known and well-regarded companies. And I make content to demystify how hiring and careers work from behind the scenes. So if you're interested in more content just like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I'd also like to thank today's sponsor, DeleteMe. More on them in a minute. Now, before we get into why the way we work in the United States isn't normal, I wanted to put a little disclaimer here and say I'm a very proud American. I love my country, and I love the ability to be able to reclaim control and start to act like the CEO of my career. And I will say that it is probably easier to do that here than anywhere else in the world. And while I'm not an expert in every other country's labor relations and employment law, I will do my best to try to give a balanced and fair view, but with the lens that we've got some work to do to catch up. In particular, let's start with everybody's favorite topic, and in the namesake of this channel, is layoffs. Now, in the United States, there is the concept of an at-will employment. And for those of you who are not from the United States, or you're not familiar with what at-will employment is, basically what it states is that an employer can do whatever they want as far as hiring, firing, terminating, laying off, and they don't have to have a reason to do so. Now, there are some rules that they have to follow, and in particular, if there's a major layoff, they have to go through what's called the WARN Act, and they have to publish it, and there's a website that you go and check, and in theory, you should be able to see, and they give people time. And in the United States, it is very common to get a proverbial tap on the shoulder and pulled into the office, or getting a mysterious meeting request on your calendar and suddenly show up in human resources sitting in the room, and they're sliding the terms of your separation across the table, and essentially they're terminating your employment without any cause. And for the average employee, there's not a whole lot you can do about it. We don't have a lot of the same protections that they have in other parts of the world. We don't have rules that prohibit employers from making these decisions, and there's not a lot of recourse other than if you're wrongfully terminated. But even then, it's a huge uphill battle to try to prove that that's indeed the case. Whereas in other parts of the world, you do have a lot more protections for the employee. Oftentimes there's labor unions or work councils that employers will have to go through and basically get permission to terminate or to lay off people. And so in a lot of cases, employers have found it very difficult to have mass layoffs in Europe and other parts of the world because the regulations are set up to protect the worker. But the fact of the matter is that here in the United States, we simply just don't have a lot of protections for the average worker. And people will say, well, you need more labor unions. And in a lot of cases in the United States, there are labor unions, but they're prominently for working class folks. There aren't a lot of professional white-collar labor unions. Now, I know in Europe, for example, there's a lot more regulations around how you can be terminated, what the amount of time you need to be notified for, and then all of the severances are built into the law. Furthermore, you just can't terminate an employee for whatever reason. You actually have to have a verifiable reason, and oftentimes the courts will overturn them and force the employer to take the employee back. So this is probably one of the biggest differences I see between the United States and other parts of the world is that there's just not a lot of built-in job security for the employee. The next big difference is job offers. And oftentimes in the United States, job offers can be relatively informal. And in fact, it can sometimes be just through email, it can be even verbal, and you can basically get started without a whole lot of agreement. And because of at-will employment, United States-based employers are very careful about the language that goes into the job offer, specifically around probationary periods. If you put probationary period language in a job offer, you're essentially forfeiting at-will employment, at least during that term. So in other words, if an employee gets terminated in month 2 of a 3-month probationary period, The employee, in theory, could go back and sue for breach of contract. But in Europe, you'll see a lot more detail in the offer letter where things are very specifically spelled out, and in a lot of cases, the term of your employment. And in doing that, it's more of a traditional employment contract where there are a lot more protections for the employee. So it's crazy to me that in the United States, we are basically going without a net for most of our existence, and we are completely at the mercy of the employer doing the right thing. And if the last 3 or 4 years have taught us anything, most employers don't do the right thing. The same thing goes for employment data and privacy. In the United States, we don't have much of an expectation for privacy in any communications and any data that we share with the employer. This goes for monitoring your emails, taking screenshots of your activity, checking everything that you do on private Slack channels. There's an expectation of zero privacy when you're working with an employer based in the United States, whereas in a lot of countries in Europe and other parts of the world, there are a lot more protections in place for the employee where they can't just spy on your email. Same thing goes for the integrity of the data that you provide them, including in the United States, social security numbers and salary data and all your personal identifiers. In a lot of cases, they're using the personal data that you provide them to conduct background checks, to verify your employment, to make sure that your credit history is stable. There's a lot of things that they do with your data that you don't have a lot of control over, whereas in Europe and in other places in the world, there's a lot more control over how they can use your data. One of the things that employers often do in the United States is when they're running their background checks, they're often using third-party services to conduct them, and those same third-party services then resell your data to data brokers. And that means that your information is going all across the internet. And that's a pretty scary thought considering how many jobs you might apply to, how many hiring processes you might go through, to think that all of these different data brokers are taking your data and reselling it to who knows who. And that's where today's sponsor comes in, where DeleteMe offers a perfect solution. They look for instances where your personal information is showing up, websites, directories, and with data brokers who might be trying to resell your personal information for profit. And they take active steps to remove it for you. And getting started is really easy. You have to fill out a basic questionnaire that gives a little bit of personal identifiers, but they need that to find what information they're actually looking for. And then they get to work immediately looking for these instances and then taking steps to scrub your information. And every so often, you'll get emailed a report detailing where they found your information and what activities they're doing to remove it. So it's just an added peace of mind to know that your data is safe, and DeleteMe does a great job at that. And if you're interested in getting started yourself, DeleteMe has been very gracious to offer a 20% off coupon if you use the code LAYOFF at checkout. I will leave a link in the comments below. And the next major difference, and this is a pretty glaring one, is the concept of work-life balance. And this is one area that the United States definitely needs to improve. In the United States, we have a reputation for working very long hours, working a lot of overtime, working nights and weekends, picking up phones to take calls from our boss while we're on vacation. And in general, we have a reputation of burning ourselves out. Our European counterparts, however, have a much better approach to work-life balance. In general, the work week is much shorter. And in fact, in France, the legal maximum that you can work in a week is 35 hours. In addition to that, in a lot of countries across the world, including Germany, France, Australia, they have right to disconnect laws. And what a right to disconnect law is essentially it stipulates that an employer cannot force you to take their phone calls, to answer emails, to otherwise be on duty when you're off of work. So in other words, they've enforced a work-life balance where it's actually illegal for an employer to require you to work beyond the stated hours. I tell you what, that would absolutely transform the United States' work culture if there were right to disconnect laws passed here. But I'm not going to hold my breath there because there's too many really wealthy CEOs who are demanding people come back to the office because they need you to spend even more time face-to-face and away from your family. Same thing goes for breaks. We have a very toxic relationship with work-life balance when you're actually in the office. And in most cases, for professional employees in the United States, there are no pre-described or baked-in break times. You're just supposed to take one when you need one, but there's a palpable sense of somebody looking over your shoulder wondering, what you're doing if you step away from your desk. Whereas in a lot of other places in the world, breaks in the professional world are not only encouraged, but they're actually built into their laws. So you're actually required to step away from your desk and recharge. The same thing goes for lunch breaks. In the United States, in a professional setting, there is not a pre-described lunch time. You basically just take time off to eat however long it takes you. In a lot of cases, people eat at their desk. They'll work through lunch while they're eating, or even worse, the department will schedule a lunch and learn. So you'll actually have to be on a training course while you're trying to enjoy your meal. And those particularly grate me. There's nothing more defeating than being told that you can't take a 30-minute break to yourself to eat your lunch, but instead you have to sit with coworkers and your boss that you just spent all morning with. Whereas in Europe, they encourage people to get away from their desk, to step out of the office, to get some fresh air, to recharge and truly get away from the work setting. And in some cases, they actually extend those lunches, and it's not unheard of to have a 2 and potentially even 3-hour lunch, depending on the country and the type of role that you're in. And in fact, in France, they've actually made it illegal to eat at your desk. And it has to do something with sanitary reasons dating back a bunch of years. But nonetheless, the law is there to encourage people to get away from the office, to recharge, to use the lunch break for what it's meant for. And then, of course, the average workday tends to be shorter. In the United States, we have long work days, very little breaks, and we tend to have really long commutes. It'd be all fine and dandy if we had time away from the office to recharge, but that's another thing that the United States sorely lacks. The paid time off culture is completely toxic and horrible. Not only do we get the least amount of vacation, pretty much the developed world, but we're also shamed in using it. It's very common for Americans to get a standard 2 weeks vacation at the start of their employment. And you have to fight like cats and dogs to even get a 3rd and 4th week. And then oftentimes you have to spend a lot of years at an employer to actually build up to that amount of vacation. And in today's day and age where they're laying people off left and right, good luck ever getting to that 4th year of vacation. And if you're lucky enough to even get more than a week off in a row, the employers look down their nose at you, wondering why you've left the team and where your dedication is. And you're probably going to get some phone calls and emails while you're sitting at the beach trying to relax and unwind. But this is one area that our European friends have a much better balance with. They often start with 4 to 8 weeks of vacation, and there's no issue of taking several weeks in a row to go off and enjoy a holiday. So in fact, some countries seem to all but shut down so that the entire country can go off on holiday at the same time. And the idea of spending time away from the office is much more important. And I think I can boil this all down into one simple statement. In the United States, we live to work. And in general, we have to live to work because it's hard to survive if you don't. Now, make no mistake, it doesn't mean that we love working, but we're forced to have to put our career first and oftentimes prioritize over our family and over our personal well-being. Whereas in a lot of other parts of the world, they work to live, and personal enjoyment and time with your family is of utmost importance. And that's where I think the United States has it wrong. So, what do you think? Is the United States way off in its work culture? Do we approach things abnormally? If you're in another country, what does the work culture look like there? Leave a comment and give me a little of insight. I'm fascinated by what work is like in other places in the world. Anyway, hopefully you found this video to be enlightening. Again, I want to thank today's sponsor, DeleteMe, and we will see you on the next one.